Okay, so today is the second day of Sivan, the 29th of May. And we're in the first chapter now of the mitzvah of Ha'amanas Elokus, which means belief in God. So, first of all, you should know that it is possible to get an English translation of it. This does appear on Chabad.org. This section was translated and with a commentary, running commentary.
Can you send that to me?
The link is on the first installment of this series now on my YouTube has the link in the description.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But I also have it as a PDF. So
you printed that?
Yeah, I printed. So I can send you the PDF or anybody else who wants it.
Oh, you have the PDF?
Well, I don't know if I can send it to anyone, but I think it's still a copyrighted one. Okay. So, what did we see last time? We saw that there is a dispute among the early Rishonim, the early rabbis. What we mean by that are the philosophical period between something like the 10th century and the 16th century. They're called the Rishonim, and we saw a number of opinions. And this was also the period that was very involved, starting with Rav Saadia Gaon, we talked about some weeks ago. This was the period that started the enumeration of the 613 commandments. So one of the ways in which you dispute was, is this a commandment or not? So we saw that the Baal Halachot Dolot, that the Ramban brings, he says that it's not a commandment, and that the Rambam, Maimonides, says that it is a commandment to believe in God. And the thinking of the Baal Halachot Dolot is that you can't hold something that is a prerequisite, which is a foundation of everything, as a commandment. And we'll see today how the Abarbanel says this. He'll say it in a very exact language.
Who's one that held to know God rather than believe God?
Okay, so that's another issue entirely. We didn't touch this. We didn't touch this yet.
Okay. We don't have that.
We will.
We will. Okay.
We will.
But isn't there something comparable with Eretz Yisrael, the Ramban? That Eretz Yisrael itself also is the mitzvah.
So there it's different. There, the way that the Megillat Esther, it was a commentary on the Ramban's Hasagot on Maimonides. So he says that the reason that Maimonides did not count the settling of the land of Israel as a mitzvah is because it's a general mitzvah. And he says in his introduction to the Sefer Mitzvot, he has 8 principles, I believe. And one of them is, I'm not going to bring something that is a general requirement that holds by all of them, by all the mitzvot. And so he said that's his teretz. In my opinion, it's not very strong. And one of the examples is this one, because he does count belief in God. And how can you say that it's not general? So he means something else by it. It's not exactly the same thing. Okay, anyway. So let's start reading. So we really need to better understand what the Baal Halachot Dolot, what this early enumerator, who was after the Rambam, but before the Ramban, after Maimonides, I believe, but before Nachmanides, he was somewhere in the middle. What does he mean when he says that this is the, how did he translate it here? That it is the root of and the basis of all the mitzvahs. What does he mean by that? So therefore it can't be counted. Rav Chazdai Kreskas, from the city of Kreskas, who's the great disputant with Maimonides. Really, there weren't very many who disputed the Guide to the Perplexed. There wasn't anyone who was at that stature.
They were burning it.
That's much later. That's in the time of the Maharal. Before then, there was no burning of the Guide to the Perplexed.
Contemporaneously, there was.
They didn't burn it. They didn't read it. It was philosophy. Some of them understood it, some didn't. But it wasn't anybody who was totally against it. And Nachmanides, who would have been the great the great opponent in a certain sense. He never wrote anything against it. So obviously there wasn't much
There was a time frame.
much later. And what was the issue? We'll see the issue later. We've talked about it also in the Maharal's base medrash. There was a lot of dispute about the whole direction that
פה אומר לי הרב שלי שהבהג חי במאה ה-8.
Okay, so he's much earlier. That was the other option. He's much earlier. He's before both of them. We don't know who he was or where he lived. Right? We don't know who he is. It's a book that suddenly showed up. Thank God today we have a very nice version of it. Mechon Yerushalayim put out a very nice version of it, but it's a very early work. But it's not the 8th century for sure, because so it could be before the Rif, which means he's in the 10th century, but it can't be before that, because Rasag is the first one who enumerated the mitzvahs. He wasn't the first one. Bahag isn't the first one. Okay. No, don't believe that. That's a mistake for sure. It could be an academic opinion, but it's not. It's very, very strongly held that Rasag was the first one to enumerate. Okay, in any case, so getting back to the topic here, because we don't have much time, we don't have any time, in fact. So, we have to understand, Reb Chazdai was the great opponent of the Rambam. And because the Rambam was so great, he was almost not studied. And also, he's impossible to understand.
Who?
Rav Chazdai Kreskas. He's literally impossible to understand. His Hebrew is just awful. Very unlike the way that the Rishonim wrote. I don't know what his issue was. He was from Spain. He lived in the time of the Inquisition, so he's much later than the Rambam. Much later. But it wasn't until then that there was somebody who opposed more than a couple of hundred, 300 years.
300 years.
Yeah. It took a long time for someone to come up and say, I oppose what Maimonides wrote.
What changed?
Okay, so the real theory, apparently the real change was that Reb Chazdai is more Platonic, and Rambam is obviously Aristotelian. That's always the general. Now it just means that they were steeped in philosophy. That was their language. It's in the same way that today, if somebody would, talk about medicine, so most of the people in the world would say, I'm either allopathic, I go by Western medicine, or they'll say, I go by Chinese medicine. It doesn't mean that they're a doctor with a degree from Penn, and it doesn't mean that they're Chinese. It just means that this is what they have in their mind. So at that time, those were the two contending theories in the world. Yes. And we discussed this at some point, that Plato was kind of hidden for the duration. Most of the Middle Ages he was hidden because they didn't have him in Latin, and it was only in Arabic. And so the Jewish scholars knew a lot of Plato, and they had it available. Maimonides apparently didn't know so much. I don't know why. But it skipped him.
He was Aristotelian.
Maybe because he was so Aristotelian. But these writings were around. He could have possessed them, and he knew Arabic perfectly. So Reb Chazdai also knew Arabic to a large degree, but at that time it didn't matter already because they had already been translated into Latin. And he was in Spain. And what shifted his thinking a lot was the Spanish Inquisition. And this is one of the earlier... 1492 it started. I know. There were a number of inquisitions. It wasn't the only one. The main one that we know about is the expulsion of the Jews in 1492, which came with the Inquisition. The Inquisition started about 200 years earlier, actually. And there were all kinds of... Inquisition basically means an inquiry. That's all it means. And there were a number of them appointed, these councils appointed by the Pope during the Middle Ages. It wasn't the only one. And the place that was most connected to the Pope at that time and wanted this was Spain. So his son and a whole community was burned alive because of the Inquisition. And that changed a lot of his approach to many things. His only son, anyway, that's Reb Chazdai. Reb Yitzchak has a whole book on Reb Chazdai on Or Hashem. It's a very important book to tell you that it's easy to understand, and that I think that that I understand it. I can't say that. In any case, So getting back to here. So Reb Chazdai in Or Hashem, and notice here also nobody read Or Hashem. So he says the way that Rav Yitzchak Abarbanel brought him, I think it's Yitzchak Abarbanel, it's either Yehuda or Yitzchak, I never remember which is which, B'Sefer Rosh Hashanah. He has a book on the 13 principles of the Rambam, the Abarbanel. We just say the Abarbanel because I don't think anybody ever remembers whether it's Yitzchak or Yehuda. There were two, I think there were father and son or brothers. I don't remember. Don Yitzchak Abarbanel. So I think it's Yitzchak. So he has a book called Rosh Hashanah, which deals with the 13 principles of faith of the Rambam. And there in chapter 4, he brings Reb Chazdai. He did read Reb Chazdai. וזה לשונו, שטעה טעות גמורה משמנה אנוכי השם אלוקיך מצווה. So Reb Chazdai has the same opinion apparently as the Bahag, that it's a complete mistake to enumerate, to count the commandment to believe in Hashem, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am Hashem your God, to enumerate that as a mitzvah. He mina mitztaref velo tetzuyar bezulat Eloka, because it is always, how does he say it here? That it is, not very good, that it is something that is added to a preconceived notion. What's your notion? Your notion is that Hashem already exists. Because what does it say there? I am Hashem your God who took you out of Egypt. What do you mean? I am Hashem your God. So Hashem your God already existed. Who took you out of Egypt? I did something for you. I made myself known in a certain way. But that requires, and there's a preconception in the mind that there's already a God. So he says you can't say that belief in God is some kind of mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah, it's not a commandment. ולזה כאשר נניח אמונת מציאות הקל מצווה, כבר נניח אמונת מציאות הקל קודמת לאמונת מציאות הקל. So he says if there's a God who's commanding you, so he must exist. Otherwise, who's commanding you? Okay, so that we already sort of said yesterday. וכל זה בתכלית הביטול והגנות. And all this is something, you say here in a nice way, this is not something that a wise person would say. That's his thinking. Okay, they started, but it's not really started. אמנם החכם הגדול השלם בדעותיו הרב, here he says, יצחק אברבנאל החזיק דעת הרמב"ם. But there he contests it. Abarbanel says about Or Hashem, about Reb Chazdai, he's not right in what he says. This is not circular logic at all, because he means something else. ולזאת תרד שם פרק זין, ובאר שם דברי הרמב"ם שאין כוונתו כפי שהבין בו הרב חסדאי. He says, Reb Chazdai didn't understand what the Rambam meant. What did the Rambam mean? שהוא נמצא בלבד או שסותרו הנהדר חזור. אבל אם העיון הטוב וישר יראה שאינו כן, אבל כוונת הרב, what did he mean? בכל דבר הוא שהעיקר הראשון והמצווה הראשונה הוא שנאמין שהאלוק הברוך הוא שכבר ידענו שהוא נמצא מציאותו היותר ראשון ויותר שלם מאשר בכל המציאות. What he means to say is that the mitzvah, the commandment is to believe that God is perfect. That he is the first, he's beyond everything, he's beyond all the perfection that we know. That's what the mitzvah is. It's something entirely different. It's not about the existence of God. It's about the nature of God. Okay, so with this we'll end and continue tomorrow. Yeah, I'll do that too.